It's no fault of Elvis. He loved the song.
She is the woman who turned heartbreak into gold records, poverty into philanthropy, and a one-room cabin in the Tennessee mountains into a global empire. Dolly Parton has spent more than 6 decades being the definition of grace under pressure. She smiles when others would scream. She forgives when others would retaliate. She laughs when the world expects her to cry. But here is the thing about grace: it has limits. And behind that sparkling rhinestone curtain, behind those warm, wide eyes and that infectious laugh, Dolly Parton has lived through some of the most painful, complicated, and downright ugly relationships in the history of American music. We are not talking about rumor or tabloid gossip. We are talking about documented clashes, public statements, lawsuits, courtroom drama, manipulation, betrayal, and moments that nearly broke one of the strongest women in show business. People smiled at her face and whispered behind her back. Some tried to steal her music. Some tried to own her career. Some mocked her publicly and laughed when she was hurt. And a few, people she genuinely loved and respected, turned on her in ways she never saw coming. Today, we are pulling back that curtain and walking through the 5 most intense, most painful, and most revealing conflicts of Dolly Parton's extraordinary life. These are the singers and public figures she truly struggled to forgive. Some of these stories you may have heard pieces of. But today, you are getting the full picture. So sit down, because this is going to shake everything you thought you knew about America's sweetheart. To understand Dolly Parton's story, you first have to understand Porter Wagoner. Before Dolly was a household name, Porter Wagoner was already country music royalty. He had a flashy style, a powerful television presence, and one of the most successful syndicated country music programs in America, The Porter Wagoner Show. He was charming, business-minded, and sharp as a tack. And when he spotted a young, raw, enormously talented Dolly Parton, he saw something he wanted, not just a partner, but a product. When Dolly joined his show in the late 1960s, replacing a beloved vocalist named Norma Jean, she was not exactly welcomed with open arms. Audiences booed her. Fans wrote her angry letters. But Porter kept her on, and slowly, Dolly did what Dolly always does: she won everyone over. Together, they became one of the most iconic duos in country music history. Their harmonies were electric. Their chemistry was magnetic. Their hits were undeniable. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But underneath, something darker was growing. Porter did not just want to sing with Dolly. He wanted to control her. He managed her appearances, dictated song choices, handled business decisions, and essentially treated her career as an extension of his own. For a woman with the ambition, the vision, and the extraordinary creative mind of Dolly Parton, this was suffocating. She had songs pouring out of her that had nothing to do with their duo format. She had dreams that stretched far beyond the boundaries Porter had quietly built around her. She stayed patient for years. She honored her commitments. But by 1973, she had reached her absolute limit. She eventually wrote the song, "I Will Always Love You," a deeply personal farewell directed not at a romantic partner, but at Porter himself. It was her way of saying goodbye with dignity, acknowledging what he had given her while firmly walking out the door. By 1974, she was gone. And then, 5 years later, Porter came back, not with an olive branch, but with a lawsuit. In 1979, he sued her for $3 million, claiming broken contracts, unpaid management fees, and a cut of her income since leaving the show. For Dolly, this was not just a legal dispute. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind. This was a man she had called a mentor. A man she had respected, worked alongside, and genuinely cared about. She settled the case quietly and refused to drag him publicly through the mud. But the wound went deep and stayed open for years. Time, however, is a powerful thing. In 2002, Dolly stood on stage and inducted Porter Wagoner into the Country Music Hall of Fame, speaking about what he meant to her even through their painful history. When he was diagnosed with lung cancer in 2007 and hospitalized, she reportedly visited him. He passed away shortly after. Dolly held a tribute concert at Dollywood, not for the cameras, not for the press, but for the man who helped launch her dreams even while trying to keep them caged. Their story remains one of the most complicated, emotional, and deeply human chapters in country music history. Imagine 3 of the most powerful female voices in American music coming together in one room. Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt, and Emmylou Harris, three legends, three distinct styles, and one shared vision. When their collaboration was announced, the music world held its breath in anticipation. What followed was the album Trio, released in 1987, a record that went platinum, climbed to the top of the country charts, and won a Grammy Award. On paper, it was a triumph. Behind the studio doors, it was something else entirely. The problem was not talent. All three women had talent in extraordinary abundance. The problem was process. Dolly Parton works fast. She is instinctive, energetic, and decisive. She walks into a studio, feels a song, and delivers it with everything she has, usually within a take or two. Linda Ronstadt operates on an entirely different frequency. She is a perfectionist in the truest sense of the word. She dissects every note, revisits every phrase, and pushes until she is absolutely certain that what she has recorded is exactly right, even if that means spending an entire day on a single vocal line. These two approaches are not just different. They are fundamentally incompatible without extraordinary patience and mutual respect. And while the music they created together was undeniably beautiful, the tension behind the scenes was real and persistent. Dolly later acknowledged that working with Linda tested her in ways she had not anticipated. The pace was frustrating. The repeated takes wore on her. And while she tried to remain professional, the friction was impossible to ignore. When they attempted a second album, Trio 2, the process became even more strained. Label disputes and scheduling conflicts delayed the project for years. By the time it was finally released in 1999, the personal damage had already been done. Linda was eventually quite open about her frustrations with Dolly, stating publicly that reliability had been a significant issue throughout their work together. She said Dolly was difficult to pin down, that plans would shift, that Dolly's attention always seemed partially elsewhere, pulled toward her own solo career rather than fully committed to the group effort. These were not small criticisms. They were direct, public, and pointed. And Linda made it clear that she had no interest in repeating the experience. For Dolly, who prided herself on her professionalism and her deep love for the craft of music, hearing herself described that way by a fellow artist, someone she had admired and chosen to work with, stung badly. Their reconciliation, such as it is, has been tentative and distant. The trio legacy lives on in the music. But the friendship never fully recovered. This one is different from the others, because Dolly Parton did not hate Elvis Presley. She admired him enormously. She respected him as a generational talent. But what happened between them, or rather, what almost happened, created a tension that never fully dissolved, and it all comes down to one song. In 1973, Dolly wrote, "I Will Always Love You." She has described the process of writing it as deeply personal and emotionally raw. It was a farewell. It was a declaration of love wrapped inside a goodbye. And it became one of the most cherished songs in country music almost immediately upon its release. What Dolly did not know at the time was that it had caught the attention of Elvis Presley's camp. Elvis wanted to record the song. His team reached out, and Dolly was flattered, genuinely so. The king of rock and roll covering one of your songs is not a small thing. But then Colonel Tom Parker entered the conversation, and everything changed. Parker had a well-established reputation for demanding that any song Elvis recorded include a publishing deal that handed over at least 50% of the royalties to his management operation. For most songwriters, this was the price of working with Elvis. Take it or leave it. Dolly left it. She told Parker directly and without apology that "I Will Always Love You" was the most important copyright in her entire publishing catalog, and that she would not be surrendering half of it to anyone, not even for the king of rock and roll. It was an act of extraordinary courage for a songwriter still establishing herself. Elvis was reportedly hurt by the refusal. According to Dolly, he had genuinely loved the song and truly wanted to record it. The rejection landed hard. And while there was no screaming match or public confrontation, Dolly has said that the warmth between them changed after that moment. A noticeable coolness settled in. History proved her right. When Whitney Houston recorded the song nearly 2 decades later for the Bodyguard soundtrack, it became one of the best-selling singles in recorded music history. The royalties it generated for Dolly were staggering. Standing up to Colonel Tom Parker and saying no to Elvis Presley, possibly the most difficult no in the history of popular music, turned out to be the single greatest financial and artistic decision of her career. If the previous conflicts had elements of professional disagreement or business tension, What Howard Stern did to Dolly Parton in 2008 was something else altogether. It was not a disagreement. It was not a clash of personalities. It was a deliberate, calculated attack on a woman's reputation, dignity, and character, and it was done for laughs. Stern's production team took recordings from Dolly's published audiobook, isolated individual words and phrases, and spliced them together to fabricate a fake interview. The result was a segment in which Dolly's actual voice appeared to say vile, racist, vulgar, and deeply offensive things, mocking other artists, making degrading comments about her own body, and saying things that were as far from Dolly Parton's character as it is possible to imagine. The segment aired on The Howard Stern Show, and his crew laughed throughout. For Dolly, it was catastrophic. Not because her real fans doubted her for a second, but because the manipulation of her actual voice into something so ugly was a violation she had never experienced before. She released a public statement, a rare and emotional one, in which she described feeling more shocked, hurt, and humiliated than at any other point in her entire life. She said she could not believe what had been done to her. She used the word devastated. She openly raised the possibility of legal action, which for Dolly Parton, a woman who settles conflicts quietly and avoids courts whenever possible, was an extraordinary statement. Stern, characteristically, did not apologize. He dismissed the outrage, called it satire, and suggested that people were being overly sensitive. Dolly took the high road publicly, as she always does. She did not go on television to tear him apart. She did not spend the next decade keeping the wound open. But she did not forget. 15 years later, in 2023, she appeared on his show to promote her rock album Rockstar. The appearance shocked many of her fans. But Dolly Parton does not walk into rooms without a purpose. She controlled the narrative. She came on her own terms. And she reminded the world that she decides when and how to rewrite her own story. This final conflict is quieter than the others but no less meaningful. Jeff Tweedy, the frontman and creative force behind the celebrated alternative country band Wilco, made a series of comments in interviews that publicly dismissed Dolly Parton's songwriting as lacking depth and substance. He suggested that her success was more about her persona, her image, her humor, her charisma, than the actual quality of her lyrics. He even said, famously, that he felt she should have stopped writing after Jolene, suggesting that her other work did not reach the same level.